Thank you, Mary, and hopefully everyone can see my slides okay. I'm sure Mary will speak up if you can't. So I'm presenting this on behalf of myself and my colleague, Ourania Varsou, and we are both lecturers at the University of Glasgow within the School of Life Sciences. So I'm not going to harbour the challenges that the pandemic brought. I know everyone is very, very aware of all the challenges that we've faced over the last 18 months. And not only did we, of course, have to face the challenges of us working differently, we were all suddenly plunged to working at home and not with our colleagues and all the challenges those brought, but we also had to very quickly pivot our teaching to online learning. And I'm sure that for anyone who's developed an actual course designed to be delivered online, you'll know the effort that it actually takes to create a good online course. Whereas we were making such a pivot and an immediate change. And what I want to do today is talk through some of the changes we made, which I'll be honest, were probably not in-depth considered changes, but rather changes that we made under the pressure of the situation. And as such, lessons that we learned as we went through it and things that we've reflected on that actually might give us insight into how we might better teach when we do return to a more normal on-campus environment. So for us, we teach a very practical subject. And so for us, not only was there the challenge of changing assessments and lectures to being online, but we also needed to think how we could pivot our teaching of a very practical, hands-on subject. So the loss of this practical teaching really gave us the fear of the negative impact it might have on, if students aren't doing the practical sessions, then they are not going to be acquiring the subject-specific technical and professional skills, but also the consolidation that they normally experience when it comes to their subject-specific knowledge. As well as that, I think what we didn't realise at the time, but that I'll talk you through more today, is the idea that we forget how many of the transferable skills our students are actually acquiring with on-campus practical teaching sessions. And as well as that, we became very, very aware of the lack of engagement we were having with students, with each other and with staff. The opportunity normally that these on-campus sessions present for us to pick up on misunderstandings amongst the students, those little reminders that we give out during the sessions about upcoming deadlines, addressing little questions about the course, all those things that students think are not, and staff to be fair, are not big enough questions to bother emailing or calling a member of staff about, but that they would ask us in passing. And as well as this, we also became quite concerned about what the impact would be for our student grades, not just the impact of changing the assessment itself to being online, but the lack of the on-campus teaching. We know that labs can consolidate our students' theoretical knowledge. So if we weren't offering these practical sessions, was that going to have an impact on their knowledge and understanding? And also as a very practical subject, we were really concerned about the impact for our graduates' future career options, especially in future pathways that might be vocational training, further studies, for example, or going on to more vocational jobs that require technical skills. If our students were missing out on this opportunity, especially as we became mindful that this pandemic was not about to resolve very quickly, we realised that some students might spend 2 years of their academic career not actually getting the typical practical lab experience. And on top of all of this, we were very mindful of our concern of our students just becoming a little bit lost and isolated. If we were not having them on campus, how were we going to make sure that we were keeping them engaged and that they weren't getting lost in their timetable confusion? So during the pandemic, when we changed to our online teaching, we had to make sure that, of course, we were teaching our subject-specific knowledge, but also thinking about how we could make sure that we were addressing the other skills that our on-campus teaching normally provides our students with. We had to be mindful of thinking about how we could continue to support our student engagement and, of course, make sure that all of this didn't affect our students' grades. So I'm going to talk through our response here in our BSc in Anatomy and how we change things, much like everyone else, with the use of Zoom, the use of Teams, and the use of e-resources. Now, following our first full year of teaching with the pandemic, in March 2021, we surveyed our third year BSc students. So they had finished up their second year with a mostly normal year, but without their final year exams. And then they had spent their entire third year learning through the pandemic with remote learning. Our class was made up of 38 students, of which 60% of them responded. The majority of these students are local students, but we did have 3 international students, and this study was approved locally for ethics. And our reason for this was, of course, to make sure that the students experiencing Year 3 anatomy in that year had a good experience. But as well as that, as teachers, we wanted to be able to make sure that we were retaining any good practice that we had developed. So when it came to online lectures, we initially made the assumption as staff that our students would want online live lectures. We assumed that they would be wanting the opportunity to interact with members of staff while we were delivering the lecture material. But very quickly our students told us, don't assume anything. And in fact, they actually made a request to us, could we convert our lectures to being online anytime rather than online live? And they gave us very convincing arguments for this. They told us basically that they had completely changed their learning approach from what we would normally have expected on campus. So our students were telling us that they felt like joining the 1 hour live lecture was actually not an effective use of their time. So what they were telling us was that if they joined the online live, they listened for the hour, and then what they were doing was that they were then spending just as much time going back through the lecture, pausing it, making notes, going away and looking up other sources, and then carrying on. So they felt like they weren't bothering to join the online live hour because they didn't feel they were getting anything out of it and just wanted to listen to the recording. You can see here a quote from one of our students. When in my house, I find it hard to pay attention, so often lose concentration. This was an issue during live lectures when I missed information, but during pre-recorded, I could rewind and rewatch the sessions. And when we surveyed our students at the end of the course, by which point most of their lectures had been online pre-recorded lectures, the majority of them reported to find the lectures engaging, which is probably, to be fair, as good as a result as we've had in the past from our student surveys when we were considering a typical on-campus year and how engaging they found their lectures. We also asked our students whether they would recommend keeping online recorded lectures beyond the pandemic. Now, I will note that for these students, in a typical third year, there wouldn't be any recordings of these lectures. If the lectures were on campus, they would be on campus live, and if they missed them, they would have to catch up just from the PowerPoint slides on the VLE or from their classmates. So the students were very clear in their messaging to us that they really wanted online recorded lectures to continue, to the extent that the majority of them wanted it to marry up with on-campus lectures. But actually just under half of them actually told us that they would like the online recorded lectures to continue with no need for any on-campus lectures, which somewhat surprised us, and this is something that we're considering as we move forward. And in fact, this semester, we have been delivering our lectures online recorded again, but with the opportunity that from January, we could get our students back into lecture rooms on campus to hear their lectures live. And when I surveyed the new cohort of students in this programme, whether they wanted to come back on campus, I got a very quick and unanimous response that they actually did not want their lectures on campus next semester and wanted those to continue as recorded anytime. Now, they gave us various messages around this, around the fact that this gave them a lot more accessibility, a lot more flexible, and allowed them to continue with their commitments outside of their university studies. So I think this is one of the first lessons that we need to consider, is that when we return to on-campus, how supportive, flexible and accessible are our on-campus lectures? and whether for a class when they have a significant amount of on-campus time through labs and workshops, whether there is indeed a benefit to getting the lectures back on campus. Now, this was a very different situation from lab delivery. So during the early stages of the pandemic, so in September of last year, we did manage to arrange a few on-campus. We ran 3 on-campus labs for this cohort of students before the second wave of COVID hit and our lab access was shut down again. So all the remaining labs for these students in their third year were delivered online via the use of e-resources. Now, those e-resources varied from videos, animations, digital microscopy, and all of these were embedded into the virtual learning environment. And you can see from our student response to the survey is that by a huge margin, the students really preferred the on-campus labs. However, they preferred the online live labs to the online pre-recorded, or the online anytime, I should say. So initially we had offered our labs as online anytime because we assumed that the students would want to work through the lab instructions, the animations, the videos, etc. in their own time, being able to pause and return to it. However, it was quite the opposite, and very quickly the students told us that they found it when they were doing the labs on their own. They weren't doing it by their timetable. They were kind of ignoring their timetable, leaving the labs to build up and then finding that they were falling behind. You can see that in this student quote here. I would put off the lab work and end up with a week's worth of labs, whereas the live ones, the majority of the work was done within it. And so we realised very quickly that the students wanted to join the lecturer live on Zoom for us to work through the lab material with them during the session. And one of the things that we had overlooked as teaching staff was that we hadn't really thought through the added benefit that we were going to get to these online live labs. By delivering these labs independently, expecting the students to work through the material on their own, there really was very little opportunity for them to develop those transferable skills. Group work, communication, discussions around ethics, for example. But by converting these to online live sessions where we were interacting with them, actually we were able to draw out a lot more skills than just the theoretical knowledge that the labs were focused on. And I think this was reflected in the fact that early in the pandemic, we were all just making those changes very quickly with little knowledge about what the students and staff actually needed. So it's really an important time for us to reflect on what we've done, what's worked well, and actually not being afraid to keep some of those lessons as we return back on campus. So I've just included here a couple of examples of how we embedded these e-resources into our virtual learning environment. I can't show the images of this, I'm afraid, due to contractual agreements with the provider, but this was an external resource that we had paid a subscription for. And one of the things that was really important for us was actually embedding not just the link to the homepage for that resource, but the link to the actual animation, for example, we wanted them to engage with. The students told us that if they were left to their own devices, they didn't really engage with these e-resources. And this is an image of a digital microscopy slide in which the students can zoom in and out of this slide. They can move all around it. And you can see in the box down here on the right, they can move around the slide to look at different samples on the slide. And this worked really well for delivering digital microscopy. So when we asked the students, and I won't read through all of these comments in light of the timing today, but when we surveyed our students, 100% of them told us they had found the e-resources helped their learning, and they found that they were easy to access. They found it helpful that they were able to access them on their own time, and they commented that the embedding of these into Moodle was really useful as a quick and easy way to access the information. And when we were designing these labs, we really found that there were so many e-resources available to us. And the initial thought was to throw them all at the students. The more support we could give them, the better. But actually we learned quite quickly that the cognitive load that that brings was just overwhelming to the students. So we learned very quickly that we really needed to think about what was the best resource and really target the students' learning. And indeed, when we gained feedback from them, we used two main resources throughout this course, one of which was an interactive atlas, and the other were videos that they watched of practical sessions. And the students by far enjoyed the more interactive atlas where they could engage with it more than the passive videos. And it was really important to us how we embedded these resources. And the students really told us that how important it was that we embedded the links to the specific resource in the same place as they were clicking on the lecture slides, for example. And they told us it actually meant I actually used them at the same time and didn't forget about them. And when it came to how we integrated them, the students told us I was more inclined to use them when staff showed us them in the lectures or labs as I understood what I would be looking at. So they found them hard to navigate alone. They much more enjoyed it when they joined a member of staff and we talked them through. They still had to do the work for themselves, but we taught them through what they were about to do. They went into breakout rooms to do it, and then they came back for a debrief. And all of this we felt really helped us with the transferable skills development too. But despite having access to some really great e-resources, these clearly supported subject-specific knowledge. They really helped the students to learn the facts that they needed to learn. But they by no means replicated real-life lab situation. For us in anatomy, there's nothing that beats the students coming in and seeing access to real samples, which show things like real-life variation, and also how to adapt when experiments go wrong as such, which of course doesn't happen in the majority of the animations or interactive resources. They don't gain the technical skills, correctly use of equipment, for example. And it's very difficult to teach all of the transferable or professional skills. Now, embedding these into live online sessions where the students interacted with staff and their peers did seem to help integrate in some of these transferable skills, but we still didn't feel that that could replace the hands-on experience of getting the students into the lab. And the students really told us that. They told us that they wanted to return to on-campus labs. They didn't want labs to remain online. However, some of them did comment that perhaps a mixture of online and on campus might be beneficial in the future. For those living far away from university, is the lab really necessary to come on campus, or could they do something equivalent online? So in future, as other people have spoken about today, you saw with our colleagues Nicola and Claire earlier this afternoon talking about their VLE, and the idea that of course they can marry up together, perhaps as a pre-lab work experience or a revision tool for it following an on-campus lab.
Sorry, but it's a 2-minute warning.
Thank you, I'm almost done. But it's important to see that really our students wanted to return to the on-campus labs. Our final concern was around this idea of class communication. This is one of our biggest fears heading into the pandemic, and the importance for us about signposting. How could we keep our students on track and engaged? And one of the main things we did was we really changed our Moodle, our VLE, and how it was organised, how our signposting was on there. We changed lots more to using Moodle books, making sure that we had very clear task lists. This week the students must do this, this and this. Next week what you've got coming up is this. And the students told us that was really helpful for keeping on track, and that's one of the things that we want to retain as we return to on-campus teaching, is that signposting and monitoring of our student engagement. When it came to the resources we used, we communicated with the students via Microsoft Teams, Moodle, our VLE, and Zoom. And I think you can see that Moodle was the least preferred for our students when it came to the ease of use, accessibility, and interactivity. So in conclusion, we assumed that our students would want live lectures and anytime labs so that they could work at their own pace, when they actually wanted the opposite. And it was a real reminder for us to be open to change with student feedback, as to sometimes our assumptions don't take into consideration all the benefits of what we're trying to achieve. We really felt how essential it was to embed the resources into our teaching materials, not just direct them to go and look at a website, but direct them to exactly which animation on that website. And the signposting was really vital for keeping them on track. Now, I will note that this is true for our students in level 3 and 4 that we interacted with, but anecdotal messages from our level 1 and 2 students who are more junior and in larger courses, they may not feel the same way. So I'll stop there and thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions.